people think Google is all they need to do. And I really don't agree with that. I think you have to do it because it's the equivalent of the yellow pages today.
You have to do it.
It's the last place they look. But if you're not asking them if they'd ever heard or seen anything about you in your tracking before they found you on Google, you're missing a big part of the picture, I would say.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs podcast. You may have noticed I started off really, really fast, and then I slowed things down because today's guest has a way of just imparting his incredibly gentle, slower, thoughtful nature on people. And so everybody listening today may hear a slower, more thoughtful Glenn as the interviewer of today's podcast. Without further ado, I present to everybody Jeff Behan. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure to be here. And this truly is the Behan effect, just slowing me down. Most people don't know what to do with me at this speed. They feel like if I dated us, I'd say I'm like a 78 record being played at 33.
Oh, there you go. And if we play you backwards, I wonder what we'll hear.
We can't get into too much pop culture or we're going to lose everybody because nobody, Glenn is the walrus. That's what you're going to hear.
There you go. Well, I hate to
Glenn
tell you
is
this,
dead.
but when you said slowing you down, I went to Tropic Thunder. So if you know what that reference was, you never go full.
Never go full.
And I'm just going to leave it at that.
I really appreciate how you only went partial. We're going to do this all day long, folks. Tip your server well. So, Jeff, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to sort of tell everybody your story, but you're one of the folks I really respect in the world of orthodontics. You do so much for others. You've been really generous and kind in your giving to help get Embracing Our Warriors off the ground. And helping create some incredible film to be able to present to people to let them know about the nonprofit I started. And I do want to get into the world of nonprofits in a little bit because I know you have your own and I really want to spread the word about it a bit. But you just happen to be a consultant who also owns some businesses along the way. And I love the entrepreneurial spirit you have. And I think there's so many lessons you can teach people listening today. And so with that, let's start with your story. Where did you start? How did you end up? And again, no references to the jerk that you grew up a poor sharecropper's son, right?
That's right.
I know that's where this would go.
That's right.
So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, my family's company, the family that I grew up in, was broadcasting. And so I started out working in radio. I was actually a radio DJ. When I was in college, I worked my way through college as a DJ, which when I got married, my wife pointed out to me that while I was being paid, it was not very much. And so being a radio DJ is kind of like being paid to have fun. And it was a great, amazing way to work through college. I actually thought I might want to be a pastor, Glenn.
You'd be
and
great
communications kind of made sense, whether I stayed on the business side or went into the ministry. I figured out pretty quickly that in the nonprofit world, they'll take all the time you've got and then some. And in the business world, you kind of actually have to be in the business world to have any credibility. So I stayed on the business route, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time in nonprofit, as you know, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about that today. I got into ortho by accident. I was running a local advertising agency. It was pre-internet, just to give people a little context. And
wait, there was a world before internet?
There was an internet, but we really weren't using it much yet. This was 1999, actually. An orthodontist happened to live next door to one of my staff. And wonderful guy. His name is Mike Foy. I think he's still active at the kind of leadership level at AAO. Ran a little practice here in Colorado Springs. He was raking the leaves in his yard, and my employee was raking the leaves in his yard next door. Long story short, they set up a meeting. I met with this orthodontist. I asked him all kinds of questions about marketing, for which he had absolutely deer in the headlights kind of response. Invisalign was new. They launched, I believe, in 98, and this was late 99. He was really excited about it. He was already kind of in the advanced years running a practice. And I asked him if they had a cooperative advertising program, and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, no offense, but I essentially see them as the manufacturer and you as the distributor. And in that world, there's really no smarter way for a manufacturer to spend their money than to help the distributor sell their product." So this is really common, to very much to my credit, and it was the tipping point for me. He bought a couple of plane tickets. We flew to San Jose, and I met with Zia Chiste, who was one of the founders at Align, and I ended up with Align Technology as a client.
Wow.
Yeah,
Back in 99?
1999. Yep.
Wow, that's amazing.
And up until 2007, I did a lot of stuff for them. I'm sure, in fact, I wish I could show you a picture of me then. There was no gray. The hair was full. It was blown dry and poofy. And I did a 4-hour sales training for all Invisalign providers. Many of you listening today probably have a disc with 4 hours of my talking head on the shelf in your office, and you'd have to look at it close to go, "Oh gosh, that's the same guy." But yeah, they put that in every practice of every Invisalign provider in the world. And the reason was, and this is a precursor to really what we're living with today, as a matter of fact. At the time, orthodontists really only knew how to succeed with referred patients. They didn't know how to deal with what they called shoppers. Uh, can I use colorful language on your podcast?
You can use as much as you want.
All right. Well, they were shitty leads as far as everyone was concerned.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, in a sales organization, if someone's interested enough in what you offer to call your office, that's a run down the hall, do a cartwheel kind of moment.
Exactly. Well, every one of us, Jeff, when we started our practices, and folks who are listening, don't lie. If you started a practice from scratch and the phone rang, you were at the front desk listening to hear. I remember standing over the shoulder of Larissa, my first employee ever, standing over her shoulder as the phone was being answered, finding out was it a new patient. So there are no bad leads. There are some leads that'll never start with you. But
oh, no question. And even I'd be the first to say that that a Google generated lead or an online lead will always be crappy compared to a referred lead. There's no comparison because you're just one of many options to a person that finds you on the web. Exactly. Versus somebody who they trust tells them they ought to talk to you. So, but the funny thing is, we had to create an entire orthodontic sales program so that orthodontists and their teams actually knew how to talk to shoppers. So that was one of the first things I did in my work with ortho.
So right now, what do you do for orthodontists? If I'm an orthodontist listening, I go, do I need Jeff Behan in my life? What is it you do?
Of course, I've had to morph over the years because marketing methods have changed over the years. I currently have 2 different companies in ortho. One is Vision Trust Communications. Vision Trust is really a full service marketing communications company. We do it if it falls under the heading of or the umbrella of marketing. I'm really passionate about connecting the dots between what the team does with the leads that the marketing generates and making sure that every one of those new patients becomes a part of the referral mechanism for the practice. But we're running Google Ads campaigns and building websites. And I do probably 24 significant practice video productions every year through Vision Trust. The other company is a recent partnership that I have with Beth Leach. Beth is another consultant out there. Beth is really the left brain to my right brain. I've been accused of not having a left hemisphere, but I had a scan and it's there and it does work. So she's all about the data, all about software, all the stuff that I never would do on my own. And that partnership has also freed me up, Glenn, to do a lot more of what I just call my passion work, out in the nonprofit world. But yeah, if I'm also at this stage of my career where I'm a little bit selective. So I'm not looking just for everybody to call and become a client. Let me just say it this way. I've spent 25 years now almost focused on orthodontic marketing, helping companies do better. And the more time I spend in it, the more important I think it is for practices to actually be better. And there are a lot of ways to be better, be a better citizen, be a better member of your community, provide better treatment options, provide better outcomes, provide faster treatment. I'm a big technology geek, I'll admit it. And I think some of the tech advancements are awesome. So I would just say I think that being better is the best path to doing better. And if that resonates with you, then well, I'd love to talk to you just to talk to you.
You know, since you're in marketing, and if people don't know this guy, you should get to know him. And like I said, great human being, but the wealth of information he is worth tapping into. You've noticed a changing trend in orthodontics in terms of marketing, right? There, it's by the way, I don't think people are going to get used to Glenn talking so slowly here. This is going to be
Is it
this.
really? I really have that effect.
I feel like I had like a really, not that I've ever taken one, but I feel like I have a Xanax. Like I feel very at peace and calm. Maybe you missed your ministerial duties.
Maybe I just brought them to whatever I do.
If you become a rabbi, I'll follow you.
There you go.
I'll go where you go. I'll join your congregation. You've talked a little bit with me about the way the marketing is happening today. There's a fundamental difference in how you view today's marketing, and I'm not saying necessarily in a good way, versus the way marketing was back in the day. And we can both say two things. One, we're both men of a certain age, right? We've been around. We can
Gray
yeah,
hair.
the gray hair. I have one gray hair for every 10 mistakes I've made. Um, but you and I can remember dentistry in the 70s and 80s, right? My dad was a dentist, and I remember dentistry in the 70s, and we remember it in the 80s. I remember the days when marketing for dentistry meant bold letters in the yellow pages.
That's right.
That was the extent of the marketing that your state board would allow you to do.
Yep.
Was a bold, right? Instead of being font, 1, you were font size 3
Yep.
and bold, and
Yep.
you paid through the nose for that.
Yep.
And it worked. But then came, the opening floodgates of double page, yellow page ads and white page ads. And for those of you out there who don't know what the white pages or yellow pages are, it's a fair question. Go look it up. And then came internet, right? Early internet and what have you. But talk a little bit about the trend you've seen recently, or at least your perception of the trend that you think you're seeing.
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking me. And boy, that's a rich and deep topic. First of all, let me just say, related to yellow pages versus the internet, yellow pages were really easy because they were published once, and so that's why you had crazy businesses names like AAA Aardvark Plumbing, right?
Yeah.
Because the 3 A's in a row got them at the top of Google of the day. All right.
It was alphabetical. You were on the
It
first
was
page.
alphabetical. That's exactly right.
And
then
by the way, it wasn't easy because you could never find what you were looking for in the yellow
that's
pages.
exactly right.
Because if you wanted, if you wanted to get like air conditioning, you couldn't look up air conditioning. You had to look up some bizarre cooling and heating subset,
100% true.
residential. It was just horrible. But anyway, sorry for interrupting. I had to go down memory lane there for a minute.
Well, Google and search marketing in general it's today's equivalent of the yellow pages that Glenn was talking about. In many ways, it has the same function. One of the things that I know in my role is that Google gets a lot more credit for the leads that you get than it actually deserves. So did the yellow pages back in the day. The reason is it's the place they look when they're ready. Well, of
Right.
course, we want to be there when they're ready. But really, to build a brand, and if you've run a practice for a while, I think you're going to intuitively know this. But to build a brand, you build the brand that stands out from the list because they already know something about you. That's as true with Google today, probably more true than it was in the days of the yellow pages and the white pages. So, but it is funny. People think Google is all they need to do, and I really don't agree with that. I think you have to do it because it's the equivalent of the yellow pages today.
You have to do
it's
it.
the last place they look. But if you're not asking them if they'd ever heard or seen anything about you in your tracking before they found you on Google, you're missing a big part of the picture, I would say. So
I agree.
anyway, the change, the shift that I've seen that I find not so winsome. One of the roles that I play in my video production, which I've done for, I think, probably 800 practices over the years,
Wow.
and probably 80 to 100 of the manufacturers that serve ortho. So you might not have a clue who I am, but if you've ever walked the floor at AAO, you've seen our work in lots and lots of booths.
For sure. For sure.
One of the questions I always ask my orthos in particular is, what was their motivation for becoming an orthodontist? Because that, we all know the idea that people buy what you believe, right? More than what you sell. And I think that's a great truth, actually. I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, like a lot of people. I'm not sure
Yeah.
that was him, but I think it was.
Yeah. What's your why?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That's Simon Sinek.
And almost without an exception, 15 years ago, the answer was I wanted to help people. I was interested in medicine, but I didn't like blood. I was so happy I found orthodontics. Some version of I wanted to be a nurse, basically. I mean, it was very similar, and I found it very winsome. And it's hard for me to find that answer today. Today, it's a nice lifestyle. I can make a lot of money. I don't have to work very hard. And I know there's a little irony here, Glenn, because the focus of Orthopreneurs, of course, is the business side of orthodontics. Unbelievably important. I know there's not a lot of that in the residence programs.
Sadly, no.
I used to speak a day a week at Temple for a while. I mean, a day a year. I would do like a business development thing.
I go to Temple once a week, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know that. Awesome.
No, it's my synagogue. I had to throw that.
Oh,
aside.
that Temple.
It's dad jokes. Sorry. Come on.
That's all right. That's all right.
There. Yeah, I go to Temple every Saturday. Sorry. Hey-o. I'm here till Thursday.
Good Shabbos. All right.
Yes, thank you.
Anyway, that shift is something that I think it's great that we talk about that. But sometimes I look at marketing and branding like a house. And if you have guests into your house, there are places in the house that guests are welcome. And there are conversations that you have in the house when guests are there that are different than the conversations you have when the guests are not there. So I guess my caution would just be there's family table conversation, and that's what Orthopreneurs is, I think. I love being a part of it. I think the conversations there are amazing. I have some negative thoughts every now and then, but I mostly keep them to myself.
It's our age. It's our age, Jeff.
Yeah.
We have negative. People don't realize how many negative thoughts we have on a daily basis.
I know, right?
I always feel bad of the Ed Asner character in Up. He's just this angry, like just in general. I hate to say it, folks, but as you get older, I don't know why maybe you become more jaded. It's not that I'm angry outside, but my thoughts are like, nobody would ever refer to me, I hope, as an angry person, right? I think I'm just the opposite. I'm usually upbeat, happy, collaborative. But God, I see stuff that makes me so angry every day. I see things that I look at and go, oh my gosh, like seriously? Like this is where we are now? And, and this is not going to turn into any politics, left, right, center, doesn't matter, red, blue, green, purple, none of that. It's just you see things, you go, when did this become okay?
Yep.
And I'm not talking about just political stuff, just the way people act sometimes or the things they say. Or I mean, again, we could go down the nostalgia pathway. But I remember the day that here's when it's non-political in any way, shape, or form that I think people of a certain age will appreciate. And if you follow me at all on Facebook, which most don't, but if you do, I'll often post things from the 80s on there just to get people's opinions. Like yesterday was Aladdin's Castle. I posted it. I
saw it. I didn't say anything, but oh my gosh, I was at the mini golf course in the arcade immediately.
Aladdin's Castle was like a game. It was an arcade. It was the PlayStation of the early days where you get to play all the games. But my point is, going back long enough, I saw a post on one of the social media channels about a woman who was fighting with the captain on a Delta flight, I think it was, that she had a hat that had some offensive language on it. I think it was FU, but like the whole word spelled out. And the captain was actually called up at the front. She was obviously being very belligerent, and she was on camera so she could act belligerently, which in and of itself was just problematic for me. But the captain actually came out and said, I'm in charge of this flight. What I say goes. I'm the captain of the ship, so to speak. And you cannot wear that hat. It's offending people. And she was fighting with him. And I just remembered hearkening back to the day where those fights would never happen
Yeah.
with sober people, and that wearing that hat in public would never happen.
Right.
And more importantly, and this is the part when like going to blow some people's minds if they're young enough, you dressed up to go on an airplane. You remember those days
Oh, you bet
when
I do.
you went on a flight, and I'm not talking the 1950s, people. I'm talking like the 80s, maybe even into the 90s. When you went on a plane, you dressed up. It was an occasion. Am I crazy, Jeff?
You're not crazy, but I will say we can at least partially blame the airlines for turning it into such a cattle kind of a cattle run experience.
Right.
So,
But going to the story at hand, when you see people acting the way that woman was acting on the flight, I just get angry. I just get angry. And
I feel that way sometimes with marketers. I think there are so many promises that are made that I know are not possible.
right.
There are claims that are made that, yeah, it happens sometimes. Does it happen every time? No. And I know that what happens inside the practice has way more to do with how the marketing you do externally will impact your overall growth.
Agreed.
And inevitably, it's the practice that, well, okay, we all kind of know who John Graham is, right? So,
Not everybody does, but
well, John is a big personality in ortho.
John is one of my favorite people.
I love John.
And when I was a general dentist, I went to go visit John before I became an orthodontist. So this is going to be a John Graham sighting.
And you still became an orthodontist.
Still became an orthodontist. But I was there. The day I was there, first day I ever met the guy, I felt like I knew him for decades.
Yep.
Right? John has that way of, you feel like you've known this guy your whole life. And I felt like we became best friends literally in the first 5 minutes. But during that day, I think I saw him tie a balloon behind one of his assistants to her that followed her wherever she went without her knowing, but she's scared to death of balloons. And then I think he put a fake rat in the cubby where his team leaves their like stuff for a woman who's scared to death of rats. And the only music playing was like Britney Spears' Toxic, I remember, was playing in the background. I'm like, who is this guy? Like, and he's funny, he's smart, and he's a great guy. So if you don't know who John Graham is, you should get to know him. He actually is speaking at next year's summit. He'll be on stage. And
well, good. And here's why I brought him up. He has. I've done a lot of work with John over the years, and I've filmed him many times. And he's spoken at many meetings over the years. And inevitably, one of my clients will hear him speak, and then they'll call me. They don't even know I know him. And they'll be like, we just went to this thing and we want to do what he's doing.
yeah.
And I have literally said, so think about John. Now think about your doctor. Is your doctor anything like John? And, inevitably he's the opposite, right?
Exactly.
He's Eeyore. And I'm like, yeah, you can't do what John does without John.
But you yourself, doctor, whoever you are, you have something about you.
Find out who that is. That's right.
Right? Speak your inner voice needs to come out because that's the authentic voice.
That's exactly right.
That's the authentic voice. And John Graham, if you want to be John Graham, there's that old, you remember the old again, nostalgia lane. So many people have already tuned out. Too bad. They're gonna miss out. You remember, I think it was Dan Quayle and maybe Lloyd Benson. I think were they the ones who debated each other?
Yes.
And he said something about Jack Kennedy.
Yeah, you sir are no Jack Kennedy.
But first he said, Dan Quayle said, they were talking about age, and I think he said Jack Kennedy, John F. Kennedy was young when he became president. And that's when Lloyd Benson said, sir, I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. You, sir, are no Jack Kennedy. And that was one of the greatest moments in debate history, in the history of the United States debates. The room just came down. And that's the thing with John or me or you or anybody else. You are not me. And I'm not you. And, I may be funny, right? My wife doesn't think I am. I know I am. But, I may be funny and whimsical. You may be very serious and maybe even a little dour.
Yeah.
But what is it about you that makes people like you? Why does your team stay with you? Why do patients refer other patients? Dr. Smith is very caring. Dr. Smith will listen to you. Dr. Smith would, do anything for his patients. Like, these are things that you should double down on, because no matter who you are, you may not be Stu Frost or Dan Bills or John Graham or any number of people that you may already know, but you are you, and you have an innate something that's your spirit that others don't have. Would you agree that that should be the center of the marketing?
Absolutely. And the only caveat I will add to that is, um, and I'll just give it as a personal example. There are things that I'm not good at that are critical to running a successful business. So figuring out what you suck at and what you don't have, and then making sure that that's on your team is a really good strategy too. So
Yeah.
maybe you don't have all of the pieces. Who does? How can we still build it with your authentic voice and make sure there's somebody there that knows how to do TikTok, even though you don't want to be on it.
Yeah.
And then don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah. I had Janelle Baum on the podcast not long ago. She's the Orthodontic Influencers, right? Name of her company.
Yeah.
And she's the kind of person, not to plug her, but she's out there. If you say, look, we don't have anybody here who can give us great ideas or help us, like, that's what she does. She'll help people like that. And going back to what you said about business, I do agree that a lot of the graduates coming out of school today don't know as much about business as maybe their predecessors did, but are much more driven by the money in many
It's
instances.
it's a weird disconnect to me.
But I think I'll give a couple of reasons why I think that's the case. And again, I won't say that bothers me. The FU hat bothers me immeasurably more than that, because today's graduates are coming out of a school that's charging a tuition 100 times what their predecessor paid 25, 30 years ago. And the fee for ortho is $5,000 and was maybe $4,000 25 years ago.
Yep.
Um, again, I've been on my soapbox enough times about it. I'm going to add it one more time. The generation of orthodontists who came before that generation didn't do anybody any favors, right? They went to school for next to nothing. They got a practice for like, I knew an orthodontist who was the number 2 orthodontist in an entire county that now has tens of millions of people in it, or millions of people in it. And the advent of insurance grew on their watch. The advent of aligner therapy for general dentists grew on their watch. There were so many things that grew on that watch. And now these poor orthodontists, and I don't really mean poor, but they come out of school in debt of $500,000 to $1 million, paying interest from the day the loan begins, right? That was an eye-opening experience for me in ortho residency, was when I took out a loan and I started paying interest that day, when I still had 3.5 years of school ahead of me. So if you do that and schools continue to raise their fees, what are you going to end up with? You're going to end up with people who are being told in school, this is a craft. You
Yeah.
need to be really good at your craft. Oh, and by the way, did your $100,000 check clear for our tuition yet? And so it's hard for them. The one that's really blown me away, that's kind of over the top in that level, is the ones who come out of school and go, I already have an exit strategy. That's the one that
I know.
you don't know the business at all, really, but you already have an exit strategy, right? I'm going to do
It's a
this,
really
this,
different.
and this, and then I'm going to do this.
It's a really different focus. And I'm not saying they can't be great orthodontists. I'm sure they can. But it's the difference between if you're a venture capital company, it is all about the exit strategy. You get in to get out.
Yeah.
That's the plan. But if you want to operate something and grow something and build something, beautiful and specifically, your craft, well, I hope those are coming out of school too. I
Well,
really do.
it's rare, and I'll tell you why. There's a great book called Why Size Your Business, like
Mm.
letter Y. And of course, Y was millennials, right? The millennial generation was the Y generation. And at the time when I read the book, which is probably about 12 years ago, I'm guessing, um, he was talking basically about the demographics of Gen Y.
Mm.
And what you need to know about Gen Y if you're hiring millennials, because that's what we were hiring 12, 13 years ago. Most of our assistants were millennials.
Yep.
And I wanted to learn better about them. And great book if anybody wants to read about it. It's a bit dated because the people reading it are millennials, right? All my orthos who are 35 to 45 years old, they're going to read the book and say, yeah, this is us. Now what?
Yeah.
And so Z, your business, would probably be the next one. But the point he made in the book that was really apropos, and why I've been saying this literally, Jeff, for 5 years now. Gen Y, the millennials,
Yep.
were the first generation to come out of college or dental school or wherever, where the idea, well, not ortho, that would be a bad example, but they were the first ones, the first generation where the idea of working one place for the rest of your life is laughable, right? Up until Gen X,
That's
which
a
I
good
belong
insight.
to,
That's right.
right? Gen X, for me, the idea of going to work at a company, working your way up the company, becoming a vice president or an executive, a CEO,
Getting
and
the
then
gold watch.
retiring for the company after 35 years with a gold watch, that was the dream, right? I'm going to start my business. I'm going to grow my business. I'm going to build my business. I'm going to take over the world. And private equity didn't exist. It did, but not in the sense it does today. And I'm going to build my business, and I'm, like Callahan Auto Parts from, Tommy Boy.
Tommy Boy,
Right?
absolutely.
I'm going to grow Callahan Auto Parts. I was on the line working them, and now you can buy brake pads for me. And that was the dream until Gen X. And for Gen Y, he proved in his data that they typically would want to work anywhere from 2 to 5 years at a company and then move on to the next one. And that experiential was much more important than money. Making a lot of money was important, but having a better experience. And it went so far as to say, back in the day when you and I were growing up, we saw that guy driving the convertible into the country club and back to his cool home. And we said, man, that guy's got a great car and a great country club and a great house. And if I work hard, one day I can be that, and I can be cool too. And then Gen Y came along, and millennials basically said, look at that guy on Instagram who's at Burning Man, or look at that person
Oh yeah.
who's climbing that mountain.
Yeah.
That's cool. One day, if I work hard, I'll get the time off so I can do that. And so all the more so for Gen Z, I don't understand how you have millennials and Gen Zs coming out of ortho residency with the idea of starting a practice. I don't think it exists, or it's very rare that anybody coming out from those two generations is coming out and saying, I'm looking forward to starting a practice that I'm going to build from scratch, build it up, and work for 40 years. I'm yet to meet the millennial ortho who thinks they'll work 40 years.
Oh, I imagine I may be one of the few people who meets as many as you, and I would agree with you.
Yeah, but if you went into any community in the U.S. and found the orthodontist, you could find multiple orthodontists who've been practicing probably close to 40 years.
Absolutely.
Right? And then
don't
Gen
want to
X
quit.
Don't want to quit. It's who they are. It's their identity. Experiential isn't as important as being known as the great orthodontist.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden, you've got all these Ys and Zs who, the idea of working 40 years for most is not what they want. So what is important? You got it. An exit strategy.
Yep.
And I think combine that with the high cost of tuition, and I think that's the mindset. But I'm not blaming them, and I'm not upset at it, and I'm totally cool with it.
In fact, it's a broader statement on the world we live in today than any individual in it.
Well, times change, things change, and it's fine. Everybody has a right to do whatever they want to do, and I think it's going to be good because when they step aside, which is the opposite of the generation before me, because my generation is still working, right? I'm 56. They're still in the prime of their careers, many of them, but the baby boomer generation, right? Many of them are still hanging on and working into their 70s, 80s, and beyond. And with the changing demographics, what?
Too many.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say a word. But if you go look at 25 years from now or 20 years from now, everybody's knocking DSOs, OSOs, and what have you. But the amount of jobs that are going to be available for graduates from ortho residencies in 20 years is going to be massive, because Gen X will be gone, right? We'll hopefully be out of work by then in our late 70s, because most Gen Xers want to retire at some point.
Yep.
And then the millennials, they don't want to work till they're 80 years old, most of them. And the Gen Zs all the more so. So the good news is one day you'll probably hear the story of a shortage of orthodontists. And then the people coming out of school will be in the driver's seat. But
that'll happen. There's a pendulum swing to just about everything. I think that will happen.
Yeah, one day. I may not be alive to see it, but It'll be interesting. Someone will play this podcast they find in a time capsule, and and have fun with it. But let's talk a little bit about your charity,
Hmm,
your 501c3,
sure.
your what's it called? Vision
Vision Trust
Trust
International. Yeah.
International.
Yeah.
Let's talk
So
about it a little bit because we're on this podcast and maybe we can make some good changes in the world through it.
who knows? Yeah. So I guess just to give it a little background, I've always felt, for me personally, so this is not advice. For me, it's always been important for me to be involved in something global and in something national and in something local. So I've had enough energy to do that always. Mostly that's meant serving on boards. I'm on the board as the vice president for Smile for a Lifetime. That's a national thing that I do. But in 1997, I started a 501c3 called Vision Trust International. It is confusing. As a guy who creates brands for other companies, I shouldn't have let my communications company and the nonprofit both have the name Vision Trust, but I did. So one's a.com, one's a.org. It is it's an orphan care program by category. In terms of any big brands that people might recognize, it's similar to Compassion International or World Vision. It's in 11 countries now, Glenn. We have, since 1997, worked with close to 40,000 kids.
Wow.
I remember when we started it, it was just a pre-K in the Dominican Republic, with a bunch of little rugrats, 4 years old, running around. And 18, 16 years later, I saw the first set of those kids graduate from a high school that we built. That was now
Wow.
a 5-story incredible anchor in this barrio kind of community in Santo Domingo. We're in Myanmar, formerly
Wow.
Burma, which is a crazy
Wow.
place to travel.
Wow.
And one of the things, if we don't have time for anything else, if anyone is interested in, we call them short-term mission or vision trips, that's a big part of what we do. And I'm actually putting together a melding of my two worlds. Leanne Panici's another consultant. She's going to do this with me. Beth is going to do it. We're going to start taking short-term trips with doctors that are just interested in doing something altruistically good that isn't even in their own community. I think there's a discipline to that. The whole idea of doing something global, it can't be marketing, and yet it can be really transformative in who you are and how you perceive things, to get beyond our shores. And we're going to go to Peru, which is on a lot of people's bucket lists. So anyway, as I said, we're in 11 countries. Kids, our initiatives include health, and education and spiritual development. And I am super passionate about it. In May of this year, I agreed with the board of directors to go ahead and become the president and CEO of that organization. Yeah, I didn't quit my day job.
Mm.
I sometimes joke, if I were better looking, I could be the poster child for adult attention deficit disorder. Um, I think most entrepreneurs are kind of like that. So thank you for asking about it, Glenn. I know you've got a heart for making a difference in the world. I think it's a mandate. I think we need to leave things better than we found them.
I agree.
And I think the thing that most Americans that I know just don't understand, in fact, can't understand, when you visit a place where they have nothing, and they just have more joy than you've ever known in your whole life, just to be alive, just to be together. Um, I have boys. My kids are all boys, and when they were 13ish, it was kind of a rite of passage to go on one of those trips with dad.
That's
Um,
awesome.
Completely changes the trajectory and the way that they think. So I don't know. I would encourage everyone to find something you're passionate about and make sure it happens. Um, and then if you want to find out more about it, I can talk all day about that one.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. What happens on these trips if someone's interested and they want
Yeah.
to be a part of it? How long are they? What kind of costs are usually associated with it?
Yep.
And what do they do when they're on it?
Depends on where we go. So the easiest countries to travel to are the ones that are in the Western Hemisphere with us. So Dominican Republic, Haiti, not Haiti. We're no longer in Haiti. We're in Guatemala, Peru, Brazil, and and the DR in this hemisphere. All of those you can get to in a day. So those trips are 7-ish days usually. Peru, South America is usually 2 weekends and a week. So, 8 to 10 days. When I go, we sometimes we're laying brick, believe it or not, building a school or putting a roof on something. Sometimes there's just feeding kids and interacting with the leaders. We've only got 8 staff here in the U.S. We have 560 internationally. And just meeting and interacting with those people is incredible. And then I always like to tack on 2 or 3 days at the end to go to the beach or go to the touristy places. Kyle Fagel and I were talking about it. Apparently, and I wouldn't know this, Kyle says that the top rated restaurant in the world right now is in Lima, Peru. So if Kyle goes, he wants to make sure we go to that restaurant as part of the trip.
Well, you can count me in for Peru for sure.
Yeah, I've never been there either, and we've been working there for all these years. So,
well, just because it's not a hard trip, it's easy to get to.
Yep.
It's time zone wise, it's not that big of a difference, and more importantly, you get to make a real difference. And I've always wanted to see Peru, and I'd love to help the people. And so, offline, I'd love to get more information about it. But for anybody who's interested, how do they reach out to you again?
I'm an early adopter in most areas, so I'm usually just Jeff Behan. Like if you're looking for me on Twitter or anywhere, I don't use Twitter actually very much, but I'm there. But Jeff Behan at visiontrust.com.
And for people who don't know it, JEFFBEHAN.
That's it.
At Vision
or you
Trust.
can just look for visiontrust.com or visiontrust.org. You can find me either way.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to say thank you to you for all the good stuff you're doing in this world, Jeff.
I love your profession. It's been a privilege to be a part of it. It totally changed and rocked my world in a really good way.
Well, it's a beautiful thing. And just keep up the great work. Keep doing what you're doing. Hopefully, I'll get to go with you to Peru because I would love to help folks and do some.
You've publicly said you're going on a diet, so it's got to happen now.
I did. I said I would, and I did.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, you'll never have to twist my arm to come to do that kind of trip. Never.
Well, and you already know this, but any way I can help with embracing our warriors, I'm down.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks,
Wishing you the best. And I guess the next time I see you could be in Peru.